At the beginning, a boy thought, "This is bad," because a truck was about to hit a girl. Without hesitating, he shoved the girl out of the way, realizing too late that it ended up shielding a small child himself, and then the truck struck him. After that, he died. When he opened his eyes again, he immediately noticed that this place was unfamiliar, and then the memory of his death came back to him. He wondered why he had done something so reckless, and guessed that maybe, deep down, he had always wanted to be a hero. Ever since he was young, he had admired the protagonists in stories, those heroes who gave him courage and dreams. At some point, he had begun to wish he could be a cool protagonist like them. Then he heard someone remark that dying like that was pathetic. Turning toward the voice, he saw a woman with wings. She introduced herself as the goddess Athena. She said that she guided the dead and granted them new lives, and without further delay, she would reincarnate him into another world. The boy was stunned and wondered what she meant by reincarnation. Athena explained that, as a god, she had been moved by the way he protected that child. She said she would send him into the world of a novel game called Round Table Chronicles, where he would be reincarnated as the protagonist. The boy was shocked and asked if she truly meant the protagonist. Athena smiled and confirmed it. Excitement bubbled up inside him. His dream was suddenly coming true. He jumped with joy, saying he was glad he had lived, before remembering that he was, in fact, dead. Athena watched him with an amused smile. Then he paused, realizing he had heard the title Round Table Chronicles before. He remembered a friend recommending it, though he had never had the chance to play it. He didn't know the story, the characters, or their personalities. Still, he felt confident. If he was the protagonist, the kind he had always admired, then everything would be fine. He said he would be counting on Athena. Athena told him that he would start at the age of 13, and that his reincarnated self would be a boy named Faye. He acknowledged it, repeating the name. Faye got it. Athena then said, "Well then," and began the teleportation. Faye reacted with excitement as he was sent off. Athena smiled and wished him a good journey. After he vanished, Athena mused to herself that the part about him becoming the protagonist had been a lie. Smiling, she revealed that Faye was actually a minor, throwaway character in Round Table Chronicles. She thought making him the real protagonist would be dull, since she had seen too many Sky reincarnation stories and was tired of them. She added that she was curious to see what this boy could do. Later, inside a house deep in a forest, someone faintly called out to Faye, saying his name. Faye slowly opened his eyes and saw a woman named Maria beside him. Maria expressed her relief, saying she had been worried because Faye's fever wouldn't go down. Faye looked around, wondering if he had really reincarnated. He touched his head and thought it hurt. Maria asked if he was okay, and Faye tried to respond that he was fine, but his words came out awkwardly. He thought something was strange, as if his words were being changed somehow, and wondered if that was just how this character spoke. Faye picked up a towel from a bucket and looked at his reflection in the water. He was shocked to see his own face. For a protagonist, it looked rather villainous. His eyes were sharp, almost too sharp, so he guessed that maybe he was the cool and aloof type of protagonist. The scene then shifted outside the house, where some children were playing in the yard. Faye sat on a bench, thinking that it had been a few days since he reincarnated, but nothing special had happened. He decided it was time to organize his thoughts. He considered that his name was Faye. He was 13 years old and an orphan. He noticed that his speech sounded very condescending, which must have been because he was a cool-type protagonist. Faye then noticed a boy and a girl staring at him and wondered why. He thought the reason was probably that he stood out so much. When they ran away, he reassured himself that cool-type protagonists didn't really mingle with others, and convinced himself it was definitely not because they disliked him. Maria called out to Faye while hanging up some clothes, asking how he was feeling. Faye replied that he had no problem. He thought that the nun at the orphanage, Maria, was super cute and apparently 25 years old. He thought again that she was really cute. When Maria smiled and said she was glad, Faye thought she was the only one who actually cared about him and wondered if she might be a heroine candidate. Faye then opened a door, thinking he had gotten sidetracked. As he read a book, he thought that since he did not know the story of Round Table Chronicles, he had done some light research. He found that it was a medieval fantasy world with swords and magic. There were people called Holy Knights who protected the people of Britannia from monstrous creatures known as demon beasts. He also learned that one could take the entrance exam for the Holy Knights at 15 years old. Faye was suddenly surprised and thought that at 15 he could take the knight entrance exam. He imagined himself becoming a holy knight, dazzling people with heroic exploits, surrounded by beautiful heroines, and living an amazing life. He concluded that this must be the plan. With determination, he thought that meant he needed to train with a sword for the entrance exam in 2 years. A few months later, Fei was seen swinging a sword, wondering if he had gotten any stronger. Suddenly, someone shouted at him, asking what he was scheming. Fei recognized the voice and saw that it was Tu. He thought that Tu kept messing with him and wondered if Tu might be a throwaway character. Tu asked if Fei was even listening, but Fei responded coldly, saying that Tu was interrupting his training. Tu angrily told him not to mess around and claimed there was no way Fei could actually be serious about training. He demanded to know if Fei had forgotten everything he had done until now. Fei, however, thought to himself that he didn't know anything from before his reincarnation. Tu pointed his sword at Fei and challenged him to a match, saying that if he won, Fei would have to tell him everything. Fei agreed and said he would show just how amazing he was. Both of them took their stances as a boy in the background noticed and exclaimed that a fight was happening, while a girl cheered for Tu to do his best. As a leaf fell, Fei attacked first, but Tu countered and struck him in the stomach. Fei's face turned pale, and he fell to the ground. He was confused and thought that as the protagonist, what had just happened must be some kind of gag. He stood up again and kept attacking, but Tu dodged every move. Fei continued to press the attack repeatedly, only to fall to the ground once more. He thought that Tu's movements were too fast and that there was no way he could win at this rate. Then he paused and thought that maybe this was a crisis for the protagonist. He suddenly smiled, wondering if this could be an awakening event, the moment when a protagonist, unaware of his special power, awakens when pushed to the brink. He convinced himself that he just had to endure until the awakening occurred, believing the event would teach him not to give up. Excitedly, he thought that this was exactly the kind of event he had always wanted to experience. With a smile, he attacked again, thinking that this was a thrilling, blood-pumping moment and that he would overcome the trial. However, a few minutes later, Fei was beaten and fell to the ground again. He wondered when the awakening would happen, speculating that perhaps he had to be even more cornered for it to occur. Tu looked down at him, scoffed, and turned to leave. Fei clenched his fist and thought, "Bring it on." He stood up weakly, declaring that it was not yet over. Tu turned around with a tense expression as Fei continued, insisting that the battle wasn't over. Tu struck Fei on the head, calling him persistent, but Fei smiled through the pain and tried to attack again. Missing his strike, he muttered that it wasn't enough and that he needed more. Smiling eerily, Tu stared at him tensely, thinking about what kind of person Fei was. When Tu looked into Fei's eyes, he felt something swirling deep within, an abyss filled with terrifying obsession, as if something Fei had longed for over countless years was boiling inside him. The immense pressure made Tu back off in fear. Tu then yelled for Fei to stay away and hurriedly demanded that he fall down already, all while continuing to attack. As Tu prepared for his final strike, Maria suddenly appeared from behind, shouting at him to stop. Tu froze, turning around in shock at the sight of Sister Maria. She demanded to know why he was doing this. Tu stammered out an apology. Maria quickly went to Fei and asked if he was okay, only to be startled when she realized he was unconscious while still standing. Fei's thoughts faintly echoed. He recalled that he was the throwaway character of Round Table Hero Chronicles, while Tu was one of the protagonists. Tu's expression tensed as Fei's final thought lingered. He had no way of knowing. The scene shifted to the house. Fei opened his eyes and saw Maria sitting beside him, asleep on a chair. He wondered where his awakening was and questioned why it had not happened yet. He thought that he was supposed to be the protagonist and briefly doubted whether the gods had reincarnated the wrong person. He quickly reassured himself there was no way God could make such a mistake and concluded that this must be a meaningful defeat. A meaningful defeat indeed. Fei sat up on the bed, let out a small laugh, and realized that it was a protagonist-only loss event, one of those classic early game moments where the protagonist faced an unbeatable enemy. He reasoned that the story must have progressed even though he lost, and that this was the part where the protagonist realized his weakness and grew stronger. At that moment, Maria woke up and looked at Fei with concern, asking if he was okay. Fei confidently claimed he was fine, waving his hand dismissively and saying that this level of injury was just a scratch, but immediately screamed in pain. Maria became alarmed and scolded him, saying he had been seriously injured. Fei, now uncertain, held his shoulder and wondered if that was really true. Maria sighed and muttered that she would scold Tu later, but Fei told her it was unnecessary. Maria looked at him in confusion. Faye explained that the battle had been something he needed. In his thoughts, he concluded that this event probably set up a future plot point. Maria stared at him in surprise and asked why he had suddenly started wielding a sword. Faye replied that it was because he was the protagonist and figured he should start training early, though he knew he could not say that aloud. He remembered the monsters called Maida and resolved to get stronger to defeat them. Faye declared that he would, of course, reach even greater heights. He clenched his fist with determination and loudly proclaimed that he would become a holy knight and annihilate all the Seda. Maria was shocked, while Faye proudly thought he had nailed it. A protagonist always needed a grand purpose. Seeing her reaction, Faye was confused that it was not what he expected. Maria hesitated before reminding him that his parents had been killed by the Seda and said they probably would not want him to do something so dangerous. Faye realized from her words that his parents had indeed been killed by the Seda, and he thought that he needed to add avenging my parents to his quest. He declared that even so, he would fight for his parents and for the world. When Maria's face tensed, Faye wondered why she looked that way. Maria then apologized, saying she had not realized it before and admitting that she had tried to act like a parent to him to make sure he would never feel lonely. She confessed that he had been lonely ever since his parents' deaths, and that this loneliness was what had driven him toward revenge. Faye, visibly tense, was startled, and thought that he was not feeling lonely, or anything of the sort. He quickly told Maria that he did not remember anything from back then, so she should not worry. In his mind, Faye pieced together that her tense expression and reaction must have been because of this. Maria still seemed troubled, but Faye reassured her that there was no need to worry. He thought to himself that Maria was genuinely concerned for him, and he began to feel guilty for not being the real Faye. He regretted that he had not even played the game beforehand. Maria reached out, touched his face gently, and suddenly hugged him. Faye blushed intensely, stunned by the sudden gesture, and wondered why she was doing it. As Maria held him close, Faye debated internally whether he should hug her back, but then thought that cool characters would not just hug someone casually. Maria softly told Faye that it was okay, and that she would always be with him. Faye was frozen in surprise as she continued, confessing that she loved him. Faye closed his eyes and wondered if Maria was one of the heroines after all. Then the scene shifted. Maria was bathing. She undressed, stepped into the water, and let out a sigh of relief. Faye's thoughts narrated that Sister Maria had once fought against the Seda as a holy knight until a few years ago, but now she ran an orphanage and cared for the orphans. In the visual novel Legends of the Round Table, she was the foster parent of the main protagonist, True, and was one of the heroines if the player followed her route. Maria looked sad as she thought about Faye. She admitted to herself that she had not been good with him, a boy who had been arrogant and closed off to everyone, including her. Before she realized it, she had naturally started keeping her distance as well. But ever since the day Faye had been bedridden with a high fever, he had changed. He had begun training earnestly with his sword and reading books, and he had stopped bothering the other children. Maria recalled Faye's declaration that he would annihilate the Masaida, and thought that he must have made that resolve during his illness. She remembered that she too had once chosen to live as a revenger, becoming a holy knight to avenge her own parents by fighting the Seda. She reflected that she had come close to death countless times, and no matter how many Seda she defeated, the fire of revenge inside her had never faded. What had finally calmed those flames, she remembered, was the moment a child thanked her for saving them. The children's smiles had healed her heart, and she had vowed that next time, she would be the one to protect theirs. Maria smiled gently at the memory. Then she thought of Faye again, sitting alone, and realized she had failed to notice the loneliness hidden beneath his awkward attitude. She regretted not facing him properly, and not loving him when she should have. She believed that if she had, maybe he would not have chosen the road of revenge. Still soaking in the bath, Maria decided there was still time. She swore that she would never allow Faye to do something as dangerous as pursuing revenge, and that if he ever tried, she would stop him, at least until the day he finally hugged her back. The scene shifted again, showing Faye thinking that Maria was seriously overthinking everything and completely misunderstanding the situation. 2 years went by. The next scene opened with Faye, now 15, standing by the door. He thought to himself that he was heading to the Holy Knight's entrance exam. Behind him, Maria watched quietly without saying a word. The scene then changed to the royal capital, Britannia, where busy crowds filled the streets. The focus moved to the Knight Order's headquarters, known as the Castle of the Round Table. Faye stood before it, thinking that the time had finally arrived. Faye thought about how it had been 2 years since he reincarnated as the protagonist of Round Table Chronicles and how much had happened since then. When he noticed some people nearby, he realized they were all members of his supporting cast and thanked them inwardly for fulfilling their roles. Then Faye's eyes fell on a boy, and he wondered if that boy was Tu. Faye thought, surprised, that Tu might also be trying to take the entrance exam, and he quickly hid behind a wall, insisting to himself that it wasn't because he was avoiding Tu or anything like that. Meanwhile, Tu spotted Faye and felt a wave of trauma just from seeing him. Tu hurriedly turned away, deciding it was better to keep his distance from Faye. The scene then shifted to a field where Faye stood alone beside a tree. Faye thought that, in his opinion, it was a pretty cool standby pose. Suddenly, he heard footsteps and assumed it must be Tu approaching. But when he turned around, he saw a girl instead. Faye immediately thought she was incredibly beautiful and wondered why she was heading toward him. With a tense expression, he wondered if she might possibly be a heroine. But then Faye remembered that he already had Maria. At that moment, someone suddenly clapped from the side, drawing everyone's attention, and announced that they should all pay attention. Faye turned to look and saw that it was a man. The man welcomed everyone with a bright, "Good afternoon," and introduced himself as Maramaru, a holy knight of the 5th rank. Faye thought, a 5th rank holy knight, huh? And remembered that in the Britannian kingdom, the hierarchy of holy knights ran from the 12th rank to the 1st, where the lower the number, the stronger the rank. Faye also recalled that knights' ranks could be recognized by the pattern of the emblem on their chest. Maramaru went on talking, explaining that because they were constantly lacking knights, they were organizing recruitment tests. He added that everyone gathered here was already so skilled that he could practically claim they had all passed. One of the boys reacted with excitement, saying the exam was child's play. Faye, however, wondered privately if an examiner should really behave with such a laid-back attitude. Maramaru then declared that, just to be safe, they would be doing an aptitude test and told everyone to pair up and begin a mock fight right away. A boy happily shouted that someone wanted to partner with him. Faye looked at the group and thought those guys appeared incredibly unmotivated. As Faye moved toward them, he reminded himself that he was the protagonist and that he hated weak-willed ideas like taking shortcuts. Determined, Faye resolved to give everything he had and cried out loudly, asking who wanted to pair with him. However, the group went silent, and Faye realized there was no one left. At that moment, the beautiful woman from before called out to him. Faye noticed her, and thought she was the same gorgeous woman he had seen earlier. Facing her, Faye commented with a hint of arrogance that she had chosen him, and the woman answered that yes, she had, since there was simply no one else remaining. Faye thought her way of speaking was a bit sharp. But even so, she was so stunning that it almost felt like a shame. Faye noticed the woman looked slightly tense, and she asked him what was wrong with his expression. Faye questioned what she meant by that, and wondered in his thoughts if she was suggesting that his face was unattractive. Arthur, however, realized she might have worded it poorly and needed to clear things up. She explained that while the rest were taking things lightly, Faye was the only one who wasn't. She asked why that was. Faye was surprised and understood that was all she meant. Internally, Faye thought that if hearing the word pass was enough to make someone relax, then they had already failed as a main character. Faye answered seriously that regardless of the situation, one had to restrain oneself and push past their limits because otherwise they would never evolve. It was just that simple. Arthur looked puzzled for a second, and Faye wondered if she had been struck by his cool words and maybe had fallen for him. Arthur then asked Faye if he had known the truth from the start. Faye answered with confusion, and Arthur clarified that although Maramaru had said they all passed, he had never mentioned that he wouldn't rank the ones who did. She explained that since they would be risking their lives as holy knights, there was no way they wouldn't be evaluated. It was obviously a test to see how well they could maintain discipline even when placed in a relaxed situation. Arthur concluded that Faye had realized from the start that he was being tested. Faye was stunned but tried to stay calm, responding smoothly, even though inside he admitted he had no idea. Arthur was impressed, believing that Faye's determination and perception were remarkable traits she herself lacked overwhelmingly. Arthur wondered how Faye could walk such a high, solitary path without being swept away by circumstances. She thought that she wanted to know, she wanted to understand him more. Arthur then boldly stated that she wished to partner with Faye. Faye accepted, and Arthur asked for his name. Faye told her, and Arthur introduced herself as Arthur. Faye repeated her name in disbelief and thought that it sounded just like a protagonist's. Faye realized it made perfect sense. Arthur, along with two, was one of the main pillars of the protagonists. In the novel game Round Table Chronicles, those two were the central characters. Besides them, there were several sub-protagonists. The plot was originally meant to unfold through their viewpoints, but because of Faye, an unimportant stepping-stone character who wasn't even a sub-protagonist, the story had turned into something beyond anyone's expectations. Then Faye and Arthur stood opposite each other with wooden swords in hand. Faye thought that even gods wouldn't foresee what was about to happen. Arthur took her stance and announced she was going to begin. Faye agreed and thought that was time for their battle to start. Faye rushed forward to strike, but Arthur leapt aside and dodged, countering with a swing that grazed past Faye's face. Faye froze, thinking in disbelief that Arthur had vanished and questioning who she really was. Then they were shown clashing, with Faye clearly having trouble. Arthur was about to land a blow when Faye's sword flew out of his grasp. Arthur thought that Faye really wasn't strong at all. Faye kept attacking, and Arthur observed that because he had such an extraordinary force of will, she had assumed he must possess remarkable swordsmanship too. But he was a little underwhelming. As Arthur evaded, she thought that still, his sword style was unusual, and wondered what kind of sword school it belonged to or whether it was something he had learned on his own. Faye glanced at Arthur's face and thought she was beautiful and unbelievably strong. Arthur effortlessly deflected every strike, and Faye realized that even though she was this powerful, Arthur hadn't attempted to hit him with her sword a single time. Faye concluded that she was unmistakably holding back. Faye's sword flew into the air again, and as he went to grab it, he cursed in irritation. Arthur then asked why his swordsmanship was so bizarre. Faye's expression turned furious as he once more thought about his face, wondering if she disliked it that much. Faye felt that Arthur was basically trying to say, "Why is your sword technique so strange?" For a brief moment, Faye had mistaken her for a heroine, but he immediately corrected himself, realizing she was one of the many sharp-tongued rivals from the game. Arthur yawned and asked if they were still continuing, while Faye insisted internally that this time he would definitely win. They kept clashing, and off to the side a boy wondered what was wrong with Faye, while another commented that Faye couldn't even use art. Faye reflected that, simply put, art was a phenomenon comparable to magic. Everyone possessed it, but he had no idea how to use it. Faye gasped for breath while Arthur remained completely steady. Arthur noted that Faye still hadn't given up, even though he should already know from experience that he couldn't beat her. Yet Arthur found it odd that every time Faye fought her, his spirit seemed to burn brighter, almost as if adversity made him grow. Arthur thought it was like watching a hero, believing Faye could become a true hero someday. But without power, none of that mattered. In this world, Arthur knew that strength was everything. A world where abyssal monsters and criminals ran rampant, and the powerless became prey. Even the most horrific, inhuman experiments were allowed. Arthur believed that strength of will alone could never change anything, and judged the world to be cruel. She concluded that perseverance didn't guarantee results, and a man who couldn't even wield art would never be able to defeat her. Faye then collapsed, and his sword bounced onto his face. Several onlookers started laughing. Arthur turned and saw a girl ridiculing Faye, saying it was hilarious. A boy added that Faye tried to look cool but was actually pathetic. Another chimed in that no matter how hard he tried, it was useless, and he should just quit already. Faye heard their voices, and Arthur wondered why they were mocking him, realizing Faye was doing his best, and she couldn't bear watching them laugh at him any further. Arthur raised her hand to her face and activated her eye, telling herself she would bring this to an end. She ordered Faye to sleep, and Faye froze, dropping to his knees. Arthur turned away, thinking it was finished, and that she had expected things to end like this. Suddenly, Faye's voice rang out, demanding who had said it was over. Arthur turned toward him, but he had vanished. She then spotted him leaping through the air, aiming to strike. Arthur tried to defend, and when their swords clashed, both weapons shattered at once. Arthur was stunned, realizing her magical eye hadn't worked, and wondered why. She knew that a magical eye was a unique power residing in one's eyes, awakened only through natural talent. Her own was the magical eye of domination. It was a form of suggestion that enabled the user to forcibly command anyone who made eye contact with them, consuming art to activate. At a glance, the magical eye seemed overwhelmingly strong, like a perfect royal straight flush that won the moment it appeared. Yet it wasn't flawless. There were weaknesses and ways to oppose it. The first was another magical eye user. Depending on the combination, one magical eye could counter another. The second was if the target possessed resistance, whether from repeated exposure, innate immunity, or a special item designed to nullify it. The third was simply avoiding eye contact. If their eyes never met, the ability was useless. And the fourth was when the target was already under a stronger form of self-suggestion that overpowered anything the magical eye tried to impose. Faye belonged to that fourth case. For the entire 2 years since he had reincarnated as Faye, he had told himself daily, "I am the protagonist." Faye insisted that protagonists never died, and because he was the main character, he would always prevail. That self-suggestion had grown so immense that it could negate even the highest-class magical eye. Faye then shouted triumphantly, asking if Arthur had witnessed that, declaring that the protagonist never gave up, no matter the crisis, and would always emerge victorious. He approached Arthur confidently, while she stood stunned and blushing. Marumaru announced the end of the exam, and Faye, surprised, asked if it was already over. Pointing at Arthur, he swore he would defeat her next time. Arthur was bewildered, yet she thought he had somehow forced her to take things seriously. Smiling, she found it astounding, and could hardly believe such a thing was real. She reflected that she had always longed for someone like that, someone who could free her from the darkness. Watching Faye walk away, she wondered if he might be the one capable of breaking this harsh world, and secretly hoped that if they crossed paths again, they could become friends.